Hey guys, it's me Saran back with another video. This is going to be a quick little PSA about affirmative action because I feel like a lot of people don't understand what affirmative action is, or the way that affirmative action works, or why affirmative action was put in place. And I hear this really common argument that affirmative action is racist. So PSA, affirmative action is not racist. Okay, affirmative action is not racist. So Vince Vaughn, his old dried up, crusty ass, he has a new movie coming out. I don't know what it's called. I'm not going to Google it. I'm not even going to Google this story. I read it a couple days ago and I was like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I wasn't even going to make a video on it. And so this conversation that I ended up having on Instagram last night or a couple days ago about affirmative action. So Vince Vaughn is doing the press circuit for his new movie. He was giving an interview. I think it was with Playboy, but don't hold me to that. I'm not sure. He was given an interview, and as you guys know, ever since Ferguson happened with the current racial climate, asking these actors and these, musicians, these racial questions or these questions about race has kind of become par for the course when they're on, a press circuit, which I like. I feel like that's awesome because now I get to know who's racist, who's not racist, who's a new black, who's down for the cause. I hope this continue. I mean, I'm pretty sure this is going to continue. Ferguson has really changed a lot of things. It really kind of changed all of our lives, and it really, shed a light on the simmering racial tension in this country, and especially with the, the presidential elections that are coming in a couple of years. Ferguson has really changed a lot with how we talk about race and how we think about race, which is awesome. But so they asked Vince Vaughn, how did he feel about race and affirmative action? And apparently, I want to say he said he's like a libertarian or something like that. And he gave some really Ron Swanson-esque comments about the government and how he feels like the government basically should not be in people's business, that the government should be more hands off and just kind of let people do their own thing, And then he goes on to say, as kind of an example of this, of how the government needs to back off, he goes on to mention affirmative action. Oh, I think affirmative action, for example, that's one of those government programs that needs to go because affirmative action is racist. Yo, reading it, you could tell, I'll post a link for you guys to the Root article that I read. You could tell the interviewer knew that he had just struck gold, that he was gonna get some clicks. He was like, oh, so what are your thoughts on affirmative action? He jumped on it real quick. And Vince Vaughn was like, I think affirmative action is racist. Think about it. You're giving one person an advantage over the other because of race. Isn't that unfair? Isn't that racist? Isn't that the definition of racism? And I hear a lot of people making this argument that affirmative action is racist because it gives people of color, a leg up or an advantage, or, they're getting chosen because of race, which is racist. As I've said in so many videos, none of what's happening right now exists within a vacuum. None of these things just popped into being out of nowhere, okay? Which is what people love to say. People love to not take any type of historical context into consideration. Context matters. We are not living in a vacuum. A bunch of congressmen didn't just sit around one day and say, you know what we should do? Affirmative action. It didn't happen like that. Affirmative action is the result of studies that showed and proved that hiring practices, admissions practices in colleges, bank loans, businesses, homeowners, that all these things were skewed towards white people. And that a lot of the white people in the higher positions were, they were effectively upholding segregation. Even though technically they weren't breaking the law, they didn't have a sign out that said, whites only at this job. They would only hire white people. So affirmative action was put in place because affirmative action was put in place as a way to fight against these systems of white privilege and white supremacy, because that's what this is. These are systems of white privilege and white supremacy, and people were trying to uphold these systems. So affirmative action had to be put into place to give people of color a chance, you know? It's like white people are born with privilege. They're born with certain privileges in our country because we live in a white supremacist society. So since they're born with privilege, affirmative action kind of like gives privilege to us, gives privilege to POC as well. It's an attempt to even the playing field. So to say that you feel like affirmative action is racist because it favors people of color is to make a statement without taking any of the historical context into place. Because I would love for there to be no affirmative action. I would love for affirmative action to be dismantled. But for that to happen, you have to dismantle white supremacy first. You have to really make it an even playing field. But you never see these white people saying, well, let's get rid of white supremacy. Let's get rid of white privilege. And then affirmative action will fall by the wayside. You never see that. You only see them targeting affirmative action specifically. You know, it's like affirmative action is not the catalyst. Affirmative action is a byproduct of white privilege and white supremacy. It's like if you have, you know, some type of illness, you have a brain tumor, right? And it's giving you headaches. So instead of fighting the brain tumor, you know, getting chemo, you just keep popping pills, popping aspirin to make the headaches go away instead of dealing with your fucking brain tumor. That's what racism and white privilege and white supremacy, that's what those systems are in this country. So affirmative action is a you know, it's a byproduct, it's a symptom, it's a, you know, it's a response to white privilege and white supremacy. So if you really want to get rid of affirmative action, you have to work to get rid of white privilege and white supremacy. Saying that you just want to get rid of affirmative action is not actually dealing with the roots of the problem, you know? So someone had left a really great comment on the article that I had read, which I had screen capped and put on Instagram, and I'm just going to read it to you. Affirmative action programs were founded when investigations into hiring and selection processes found that highly qualified minorities were not even being considered at all. Most were blatantly being looked over because of race. Even to this day, there are studies about identical resumes being sent out, but with different addresses and ethnic names, and the responses show that the discriminatory practices are still happening, which I've talked about in other videos. Studies show still to this day right now in 2015 that hiring practices and college admissions and things like that still skew heavily towards white people, towards people with Anglo-Saxon names, for example. And I actually have a video coming soon, maybe next week, about names and naming and ethnic names and things like that. You know, and this is a part of America's history. This is a part of our legacy going back to when, you know, immigrants and Eastern Europeans were coming over and they had to change their Russian names, their Polish names, their Czechoslovakian names, their Jewish names because they didn't want to be seen as immigrants and they wanted to be able to get jobs and opportunities. So last names like, you know, Stojakovic became Smith. You know, I know y'all have all seen fucking, not Five Goes West, An American Tale, which is about the Mouskowitz, the Russians, coming over to this country, and they end up changing their name. Like, Tanya Mouskowitz has to change her name to, like, Tilly Mouse or something. Fievel has to change his name to, like, Philly. Like, they have to give themselves these more, you know, normal Anglo-Saxon names. And that is a practice that's still going on to this day, you know, where they look... Again, like I've said, I've made so many videos about subconscious and unconscious biases where I don't think a hiring person is sitting there like an evil genius rubbing his hands together saying, you know, oh, I see fucking Emilio Estevez. I'm not going to hire him. No. But there is, you know, an unconscious bias and knee-jerk reaction when you look at one resume that says Emilio Estevez and you look at another resume that says Charlie Sheen, which is a name that might seem more familiar, more recognizable. And the reason why I use those two names are because Charlie Sheen and Emilio Estevez are brothers. Charlie Sheen's original name was Carlos Estevez. He changed it to Charlie Sheen to improve his chances of his acting career. So this is still something that's going on today. So for people to just be like, well, affirmative action is racist because it gives people of color an unfair advantage, it's like, are you living in reality or are you living in the white privilege delusional bubble? White privilege is a hell of a drug. Let me continue with this quote, with this comment. African Americans and other minority groups are graduating from college at an all-time high and are extremely intelligent. This notion that any person of color hired is somehow unqualified or taking some smarter white person's job never takes into account that they may have been the best candidate and was not given an opportunity. That mode of thinking is at the core of racism in this country. I've never walked into a corporate job and seen an overwhelming amount of people of color. There isn't a growing number of Fortune 500 C-level employees of color, and to the people saying affirmative action is racist, when did the racist discriminatory practices against minorities end? What decade did this miraculous cultural shift to equality happen? And I say the same thing. Just like how people say, well, where's your proof? Where's your proof that it was racist? I'm getting to the point now where I ask people like, well, motherfucker, where's your proof that we are living in equality? What is your proof? Barack Obama, that's your proof? That's your proof? Because that doesn't have anything to do with the regular average person that's not being hired because of the name that is on their resume. And studies have shown, I will include links for you guys, this is still going on to this day. The numbers are there, the facts are there, the statistics are there. You have people that are basically just talking out of their ass because when they hear a concept of affirmative action, they immediately think, well, that's not fair. Someone is getting something that I don't have. And especially with white people, they never take into account the fact that they are born into a certain amount of privilege in this country. And all we're trying to do is level the playing field. Nobody wants to be in a marginalized group, as they say all the time. Nobody wants to feel like they're a part of a quota. I don't want to feel like I got hired somewhere or that I got into a school just to fulfill a quota because they don't have enough black people or they don't have enough women or they don't have enough this or they don't have enough that. But this is the way that it has to be because we still have these systems in place of white privilege, white supremacy, male privilege, discrimination against women. But instead of working to dismantle those systems, people want to target affirmative action or quota programs. Like, no, let's look at the bigger picture. Let's fight the octopus. Let's fight the brain tumor. Let's not worry about the headaches and the suckers on the tentacles, Bigger picture. So I put this post on Instagram and somebody left a comment. Coming from someone who benefits from it, just listen. Coming from someone who benefits from it as a Hispanic, affirmative action was necessary in the beginning but has since become unfair. If I get a 2,000 on the SAT and so does my white friend, I will be accepted into the college over him. That's the definition of racism, picking someone over another because of their race. Which, people have this weird idea, like I've said before, that racism is anything that has to do with race. Racism is specifically about stereotypes and discrimination. Affirmative action is not racist. Affirmative action is not just about picking one person over the other because of race or gender. Because again, a lot of places also now have quotas for women, which is also a part of affirmative action. It's not about picking one person over the other because of race or gender. It is about combating privilege that males and white people already have. Public service announcement. I replied to that person, it's been proven time and again recently in all caps, that hiring practices in college admissions, especially at top tier schools, still skew heavily towards white people. There are so many studies on this. The point of affirmative action is not picking one person over another because of race. White people are born with privilege in this country because of centuries of advantages in education, housing, wealth, etc. And affirmative action is meant to even the playing field by giving privilege to non-whites. If they don't like it, they should work harder to dismantle the systems of white privilege and white supremacy. And that's really the bulk of this public service announcement. Affirmative action is not racist. White privilege is racist. White supremacy is racist. The systems that built this country were and are racist. So if you don't like affirmative action, work to dismantle white supremacy. Work to dismantle white privilege. And if you don't want to do that work, then don't fucking sit in Playboy magazine, Vince Vaughn, and whine about how affirmative action is racist. Because you don't want to do the work to really deal with what the problems are in this country. This has been a public service announcement. Peace.